The war had begun. It wasn't just a battle for power or resources. This was a fight for survival. A dark force, the Tsan Collective, had emerged from the void, a ruthless alien empire bent on subjugating every star system it encountered. Their fleets were vast, their weapons destructive, and their resolve unshakable. They crushed entire civilizations with ease, leaving only ashes in their wake. Their ultimate goal: total galactic domination. In the midst of this chaos stood humanity. Once considered a mere blip in the grand scheme of galactic civilization, humans had ascended to unexpected heights. Their technology was primitive compared to the great empires of the cosmos, but their determination, their adaptability, and their fierce drive to survive set them apart. It was the year 2417 when the first major clash between human and Tsan forces occurred at the edge of the Andromeda sector. The human fleet, led by Admiral Elena Vasquez, had managed to rally its scattered forces after the devastating initial Tsan incursion. Vasquez, a seasoned tactician and respected leader, was known for her uncanny ability to read the battlefield. She had been chosen for her leadership and strategic mind, but no one was sure if the human forces could stand up to the might of the Tsan. The Tsan were relentless. Their warships, massive, spiked behemoths, were capable of bending light itself around them, making them nearly invisible to most sensors. Their weapons, harnessing the power of black holes and supernovae, tore through the fabric of space with terrifying precision. And their soldiers, clad in black, chitinous armor and armed with energy weapons that could disintegrate anything in their path, had no regard for mercy. As Admiral Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Perseus, the flagship of the human fleet, she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her shoulders. The stars themselves seemed to flicker dimly outside the massive viewport. Ships of every size and shape, human, alien, and hybrid, drifted in formation, awaiting the order to engage. The once vibrant galaxy, full of countless worlds teeming with life, was on the verge of destruction. "Admiral," said Commander Jackson Lee, her first officer, his voice crackling over the intercom. "Scanners show multiple Tsan fleets on a direct course for the sector. They're coming faster than we anticipated." Vasquez's eyes narrowed. She had anticipated this. The Tsan Collective was known for its speed and surprise attacks, but humanity had adapted. They developed new weapons, particle disruptors that could weaken the structural integrity of the Tsan's advanced armor, and stealth ships designed to counter the enemy's cloaking technology. The key, she knew, was to strike first and strike hard. "We're ready, Commander," Vasquez replied, her voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Prepare the fleet for an ambush. Engage all stealth tactics and deploy the disruptors as soon as they enter range." The plan was simple: lure the Tsan into a trap. The human fleet, smaller but more agile, would hide in the nearby asteroid field, using the debris as cover to launch a surprise assault. The first wave of Tsan ships would be the decoy, drawn in by the bait and then caught in the ambush. Vasquez knew the risks. If the Tsan found them before they struck, they'd be wiped out. But it was a risk she was willing to take. As the fleet moved into position, Vasquez's mind raced. This was their chance. If they could deliver a crushing blow to the Tsan, it would not only give humanity a fighting chance, but it would send a message to the galaxy. The humans would not be so easily conquered. "Prepare for combat," Vasquez ordered, her voice resolute. "The fate of the galaxy rests in our hands." But as the Tsan fleet approached, the unimaginable happened. Their ships, once invisible, suddenly flickered into view. The human fleet's cloaking technology had worked, but for some reason the Tsan had adapted more quickly than expected. Their ships were now fully visible and they were coming at full speed. "Captain," shouted Lieutenant Asha Go, one of the tactical officers. "They've detected our position." "Not possible," Vasquez muttered, staring at the displays. "How could they?" Before she could finish her thought, the first wave of Tsan ships opened fire. Massive bursts of energy shot across the void, striking human vessels with unrelenting force. The ambush was no longer a surprise. The war for humanity's survival had begun in earnest, and Admiral Vasquez had no choice but to fight back with everything they had. The human fleet was already reeling from the first barrage of Tsan fire when Admiral Elena Vasquez made her move. The Perseus shuddered violently as a Tsan energy blast slammed into its starboard side. Sparks flew from the console panels, but the ship held firm. For a brief moment, the crew stood in stunned silence. The battle had gone from strategic maneuvering to full-scale conflict in the blink of an eye. "Return fire. All ships engage the Tsan." Vasquez's voice cracked over the command channel, sharp and commanding. The Perseus's forward guns came to life, releasing a barrage of rapid-fire photon bursts. The nearby ships followed suit, their weapons glowing with destructive power as they fired into the advancing Tsan fleet. But it quickly became clear that their shots, though accurate, were only scratching the surface of the enemy's massive ships. The Tsan warships, designed with shields capable of withstanding most forms of human weaponry, barely flinched as they absorbed the fire. The Perseus was smaller, more agile, but it was severely outgunned. And now, the enemy's cloaking technology had adapted to the point where it was almost impossible to track their movements. They moved like shadows, unpredictable and devastating. On the bridge, Commander Jackson Lee's voice broke through the chaos. "Admiral, we need to fall back. Our current tactics aren't working. Our disruptors aren't penetrating their shields. We're outgunned." Vasquez stared at the readouts, seeing her fleet steadily being pushed back, ship after ship losing ground. She clenched her fist against the command chair, refusing to give in. The lives of thousands if not millions were at stake and retreat was not an option. But even she knew when to rethink a strategy. "Commander," she said, her tone cold and determined, "we're not retreating. We're adapting." A grim realization washed over the crew. The battle was not one they would win on firepower alone. It was going to take something more, something human. "Get me Lieutenant Go on the tactical station," Vasquez ordered. The ship's tactical officer, Lieutenant Asha Go, was a brilliant strategist in her own right, and she quickly appeared by Vasquez's side. "Lieutenant, we're going to have to outsmart them. We're going to use the Tsana's own arrogance against them." Go raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" "They believe we're predictable. They think we're out of options. We're going to make them think they've already won." At the heart of Vasquez's plan was a daring move that would leave her fleet vulnerable. But if it worked, it would force the Tsan into an unanticipated position, where their overconfidence would be their downfall. The human fleet began a slow, deliberate retreat toward the asteroid belt. Vasquez knew that the Tsan, overconfident in their superiority, would think they were retreating out of fear. The key was to bait them further into the trap, make them chase, make them overextend. Only then could they unleash the true power of humanity's ingenuity. "Prepare the decoys," Vasquez instructed. The decoys, high-tech drones designed to look like valuable human vessels, would be deployed ahead of the fleet, designed to attract enemy fire and draw the Tsan into the asteroid field. The drones were programmed to send out distress signals and make themselves appear as prime targets. "What's the play after that?" Go asked, already running simulations in her mind. "Once they chase the decoys into the belt, we'll activate our cloaking devices. We'll use the terrain to our advantage and launch a series of surprise attacks from multiple angles. Our disruptors will break their shields, and when they're vulnerable, we hit them hard." The crew worked quickly, the tension palpable as they prepared for a high-risk gambit. Vasquez knew the stakes were higher than ever, but the clock was ticking. Every moment she delayed could mean the end of everything. The decoys were deployed, and soon the Tsan fleet sensors detected the fake human vessels. It worked. The Tsan took the bait, their ships peeling off from the main battle to pursue the drones, confident that the human fleet had scattered. "We've got them," Vasquez whispered, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Now let's show them what we're made of." As the Tsan advanced further into the asteroid belt, the human fleet activated its cloaking technology, turning their ships into mere whispers in the vast emptiness of space. The ambush was set. For the first time in hours, the human forces had the upper hand, and Vasquez could feel the tides of war begin to shift. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: humanity would not go down without a fight. The first victory was within reach, and they would make it count. With a series of coordinated strikes, the humans unleashed their full fury, and the Tsan were caught off guard. As the human fleet tore into the enemy, Vasquez knew they were only beginning to show the galaxy what they could do. The inferno of the void had only just begun. The asteroid belt was a swirling maze of jagged rocks and debris, and within it the human fleet struck with deadly precision. Ships materialized from the shadows, cloaked in silence, their disruptor beams cutting through Tsan armor like a hot knife through butter. The enemy, still reeling from the surprise of the ambush, faltered as their mighty warships took heavy damage. Admiral Elena Vasquez watched from the command deck of the Perseus, her fingers tight around the armrests. The battle was unfolding as planned, but there was no time to savor victory. The Tsan were a relentless foe. Every ship that fell was merely a stepping stone for their greater war machine, and they would regroup. There was no room for complacency. "We've breached their shields on the lead fleet, Admiral," Lieutenant Asha Go announced from the tactical station. "They're losing ships fast." Vasquez's face remained neutral, but internally she allowed herself a brief flicker of hope. This could be the turning point they desperately needed. But just as the momentum seemed to be shifting, an unsettling message appeared on the communication screen. It was a transmission from the Odyssey, one of the human ships in the rear of the battle formation. "Admiral," the voice of Captain Idris Khan crackled through the channel, sounding strained. "We're being overwhelmed. There's a massive Tsan fleet behind us, larger than we expected. We're trapped. They're cutting us off. Request immediate support." Vasquez's heart sank. The Odyssey was a heavy cruiser, one of the most formidable ships in the fleet. If it was in danger, then the situation was far worse than it appeared. The trap was closing on both sides. "Captain Khan, hold your position," Vasquez ordered, forcing calm into her voice. "We'll break through, but you have to hold for just a little longer. We're coming to you." The words were confident, but she knew the truth: they were running out of time. The human fleet's strength was in its speed and flexibility, but the Tsan, with their overwhelming numbers and superior firepower, could crush any fleet caught in a two-front battle. Vasquez glanced at the hollow map, mentally calculating their next move. The time for subtlety was over. "Commander Lee, get me a path to break through the Tsan line," Vasquez ordered. "We need to assist the Odyssey immediately. Full speed ahead." Lee nodded sharply. "Aye, Admiral. I'm plotting a course that will force the Tsan to split their forces. We'll have to punch through at their weakest point." Vasquez watched the crew as they prepared for the next phase of the assault. She could feel the tension in the air. This next move would either turn the tide of the battle or doom them all. As the Perseus surged forward, flanked by several smaller human vessels, the Tsan reacted quickly, converging from all sides to trap the human ships. The enemy had realized that the humans were trying to make a run for the Odyssey, and their response was swift and deadly. "Admiral," Lieutenant Go warned, "the Tsan are shifting their forces to surround us. They're going for a full encirclement. We can't break through unless we take them head-on." "Then we take them head-on," Vasquez declared. "Prepare all fighters for a full assault. We'll create a breach by force." The Perseus' hangar doors opened, releasing a swarm of human starfighters. The agile ships darted through the debris-filled space, launching into a flurry of missile strikes and dogfights. The Tsan responded in kind, their sleek warships firing massive energy beams as their own fighter craft soared toward the human vessels. The stars above became a vast sea of flashing lights, explosions, and burning wreckage. The human fleet pushed forward with a ferocity that surprised even Vasquez. Ships fought and died in an unrelenting tide, the weight of each loss heavy on their minds. Vasquez knew that they were paying a price. Each battle they won cost them lives, precious lives that humanity could ill afford to lose. But they had no choice. There was no turning back. As the Perseus and its allies carved a path through the enemy line, they finally made it to the Odyssey's position. The cruiser was badly damaged, its shields barely holding, and the crew was fighting to keep it afloat. Tsan forces were swarming, and the once mighty vessel was now struggling to survive. "We're here?" Vasquez shouted into the comms. "Captain Khan, prepare for emergency evacuation. Get your people to the Perseus. We'll cover you." The Odyssey's weapons fired weakly as the human fleet laid down a barrage of supporting fire, pushing back the Tsan forces and giving the beleaguered crew just enough time to disengage. As the Odyssey began to pull away, a Tsan capital ship fired one final, catastrophic blast, striking the Odyssey in its vulnerable core. The human flagship watched as the once proud cruiser erupted into a massive fireball. The explosion sent shockwaves through the nearby ships, the debris scattering across space like the remnants of a shattered dream. "No," Vasquez shouted, slamming her fist into the armrest. "We won't forget this." Her voice was low and full of anger, but it steeled her resolve. The Odyssey's crew had fought valiantly, and their sacrifice would not be in vain. The Tsan had taken a tremendous toll on humanity's forces, but the humans had taken a toll on them as well. The battle wasn't over, but as the dust settled and the human fleet regrouped, Vasquez knew one thing for certain: they had struck a blow against the Tsan. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was enough to show the galaxy that humanity would not be easily crushed. And as the remnants of the Odyssey drifted into the void, Vasquez whispered a promise to herself, one that would fuel her in the days ahead. "We will make them pay." The aftermath of the Odyssey's destruction hung heavy in the air like the smoke of a battlefield, thick with grief and determination. Admiral Vasquez stood in the war room of the Perseus, her eyes fixed on the hollow map, where red marks indicated the scattered debris of a battle they'd barely survived. It had been a victory, yes, but it had come at a terrible cost. The destruction of the Odyssey was a blow to morale, but it also proved something far more important to the humans. The Tsan, despite their technological superiority, were not invincible. They could be hurt and they could be outwitted. Admiral, Commander Jackson Lee's voice broke through her thoughts. We've received reports from the fleet, scattered, but there are survivors. The Odyssey's crew is alive. We're picking up escape pods all over the sector. It'll take time, but we'll get them. Vasquez nodded slowly, her gaze hardening. Good. They may have lost the ship, but we haven't lost their spirit. They'll fight again and so will we. We need to regroup, Lee continued. We've taken serious damage. The fleet's going to need repairs before we can move on to the next phase of the campaign. Vasquez turned away from the map and paced the room. Repairing the fleet is crucial. But time is the one thing we don't have. If the Tsan regroup, they'll come for us with everything they've got. We need to strike first. But we're still outnumbered, Lee cautioned. If we push too hard, we risk throwing away everything we've gained. Vasquez stopped, her hand resting on the table. She could feel the weight of leadership pressing down on her. The Tsan were formidable, yes, but the human spirit was resilient. If she could exploit that, they had a chance. But the risks were higher now than ever before. We're not going to throw everything away, she said, her voice steady. But we need to hit them where it hurts. We need to find their command ship. If we can take it down, we can destabilize their whole operation. But we can't do it alone. Lee raised an eyebrow. You're thinking about a coalition? Vasquez nodded. It's the only way. If we can unite the other factions, the ones who've been resisting the Tsan for years, we can strike a blow that will force the enemy to rethink their strategy. But it won't be easy. The galaxy had fractured long before the Tsan arrived. There were dozens of factions, some of them peaceful, others fierce warriors, and a few just trying to survive. Many had avoided human contact, too distrustful of their motives to ally with them. But now, with the Tsan invading, the universe was slowly realizing that humanity's survival was tied to theirs. Vasquez turned to Lee, her mind made up. We'll reach out to the other factions. If they want to live, they'll have to fight together. We can't afford to be divided anymore. Weeks passed in a flurry of diplomatic efforts, covert meetings, and tense negotiations. Vasquez and her fleet visited world after world, reaching out to species that had once dismissed humanity as a fledgling race. Some refused to meet, others demanded impossible concessions, and a few welcomed them with open arms. The Perseus and the fleet's remaining ships grew strained, with every crew member pushed to their limits. It wasn't just the damage from battle, it was the mental toll, the constant uncertainty that weighed heavily on everyone. But then a breakthrough came. The Zaren, an enigmatic race known for their cloaking technology, agreed to a tentative alliance. The Khazru, a warrior people whose fleet had been decimated by the Tsan in the early stages of the invasion, pledged their forces in exchange for technology to bolster their defenses. The Ishtari, a peaceful but scientifically advanced race, sent a fleet of medical ships and humanitarian aid to support the war effort. The coalition was fragile, but it was growing. Admiral Vasquez stood in the war room again, this time with representatives from the other factions at the table. The room hummed with a nervous energy as she addressed the group. Her voice rang clear and authoritative, cutting through the tension. The Tsan have underestimated us, she began. They believe we are divided, weak, and that we will fall apart before they even need to try. But we've shown them, with the sacrifice of the Odyssey, that we are more than just survivors. We are warriors. And together we can tear apart the Tsan's hold on this galaxy. The representatives exchanged uneasy glances, but there was an unmistakable sense of resolve among them now. The diplomatic talks had been exhausting, but the gravity of the situation was undeniable. The Tsan were coming for everyone, and they would leave nothing but ashes behind if they were allowed to continue their rampage. We strike at their heart, Vasquez continued. We hit their command ship. If we take it down, we take away their ability to coordinate the invasion. If we succeed, they'll have no choice but to retreat, at least long enough for us to regroup and launch a counteroffensive. The Zaren representative, a tall, slender figure cloaked in deep blue, spoke first. Our cloaking technology will give us the element of surprise. We will send our finest warriors and stealth ships to disable their communication networks before you make the assault. The Khazru, a towering species covered in thick, scaled armor, nodded. Our forces are yours, Vasquez. We will fight with you until their fleets are in ashes. Let us show them the strength of those they thought weak. The Ishtari, their pale blue skin almost glowing in the dim light, added, We will supply you with medical ships to tend to the wounded after the battle. No one will be left behind. Vasquez looked around the room, her gaze steady. This is our chance. But we need to strike soon, before they realize what's coming. We can't waste another moment. The allies nodded in unison, their faces grim but resolute. The galaxy was on the brink, and only together could they face the storm. The humans had made their mark on the Tsan, but the real fight was just beginning. They would take the battle to the heart of the enemy, and they would fight until the very last breath. "Get ready," Vasquez said, her voice a low growl. "We're going to end this war." The coalition fleet stood at the edge of Tsan space, poised for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever attempted. The combined forces of humans, Zarin, Khosru, and Ishtari gathered in formation, the distant stars flickering like dying embers in the vast blackness of space. Vasquez stood on the command deck of the Perseus, looking out at the assembled warships, each representing a race that had set aside its differences for the greater cause. "We've got one shot at this," Vasquez muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. Lieutenant Asha Go stood beside her, scanning the readouts. "Everything checks out, Admiral. The fleet is in position, and the Zarin cloaks are functioning as expected. We can slip past the Tsan outer defenses without detection." Commander Jackson Lee, always by her side, spoke up. "But once we hit the heart of their command ship, all hell's going to break loose. The Tsan won't take this lightly. They'll retaliate hard." Vasquez nodded. "I know. But we can't back down now. We've already seen the kind of destruction they're capable of. We can't wait for them to come to us. If we're going to win this, we have to take the fight to them." The plan was simple: strike at the Tsan's command ship, a behemoth of unimaginable power, and cripple their ability to communicate and coordinate the war effort. The Zarin fleet would infiltrate the Tsan's outer defense perimeter using their cloaking tech, slipping in unnoticed. The humans and their allies would follow, hitting the enemy with a lightning-fast assault. Vasquez turned to the coalition representatives in the briefing room, each face showing a mix of determination and anxiety. "We strike together," she said, voice ringing with authority. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we show them that humanity, and all of us, are not to be underestimated." The room fell silent as everyone nodded in agreement, their resolve hardened by the weight of what was at stake. It was no longer about political alliances or survival, it was about making a stand for freedom for every race, and for every species that had been subjugated by the Tsan. They would either win together or they would fall together. The plan was set into motion. The Zarin cloaking ships led the way, weaving through the Tsan's outer patrols undetected. The other factions followed close behind, careful not to reveal their positions too early. The Tsan command ship, a monstrous structure of gleaming black metal and swirling energy, loomed large on the horizon. It was a sight that sent shivers through even the most battle-hardened crews. This was where it all came down. "All ships, prepare for combat," Vasquez ordered, her voice calm but carrying the weight of 100 battles. "Once we're within range, we launch everything we've got." The first wave of attacks hit the Tsan outer defense stations, their shields buckling under the relentless assault. The Tsan, caught by surprise, scrambled to retaliate, but the Zarin cloaks had done their job. The defenders were blind to the true threat. Human starfighters launched from the Perseus and the other ships, forming tight formations and sweeping through the Tsan defenses. Explosions erupted as their disruptor beams slammed into enemy ships, tearing through shields and armor alike. The battle raged across the void, flashes of light and energy ripping through space like thunder. Admiral Vasquez's eyes were locked on the Tsan command ship, now within firing range. It was time. "Fire everything," she barked, her voice unwavering. The Perseus and the rest of the human fleet unleashed a full barrage of heavy weaponry. The massive energy blasts screamed across the distance, striking the Tsan command ship with precision. For a moment, the void was filled with blinding light. Then the enemy retaliated. The Tsan command ship erupted in a storm of retaliatory fire, massive beams cutting through the darkness, scorching everything in their path. The human fleet was forced to scatter, dodging incoming fire as they moved to regroup for another assault. The Tsan were powerful, but the human fleet was fast and relentless. "Admiral, we've got incoming." Lieutenant Go's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "They've just deployed reinforcements. Another wave of Tsan ships coming in fast. We're going to be surrounded soon if we don't act quickly." Vasquez's mind raced. The Tsan were getting desperate, they had realized the danger to their command ship. But the humans and their allies had already committed. Retreat was not an option. "Prepare for the final strike," Vasquez said, her tone cold and determined. "We're not leaving until their command ship is destroyed. The Zarin will take out their communications hub. Everyone else, we focus on hitting their weapons systems. If we break their firepower, we break their will to fight." The coalition fleet pushed forward, the human ships leading the charge with a renewed sense of urgency. The fighters swarmed the command ship, dodging deadly beams and launching torpedoes aimed at critical points. The Zarin cloaking ships darted in and out of the shadows, targeting the Tsanes communication arrays, ensuring that the enemy would have no way of calling reinforcements. But the battle was not without its cost. The Courageous, one of the Khazru heavy cruisers, was struck by a direct hit and split in two. The crew fought valiantly to the end, but the ship was lost. Vasquez's stomach twisted in fury as she watched the cruiser's final moments unfold. "Push harder," she roared into the comms. "We are not giving up. For the Courageous, for all of us." Then, just as it seemed like the battle might slip from their grasp, the Tsan command ship shuddered violently. Its shields were faltering. The Zarin had done their part. The Tsan could no longer communicate with their reinforcements. And now the humans had taken their best shot. With a final, coordinated volley of fire from the remaining fleet, the Tsan command ship erupted in a massive explosion. The resulting shockwave sent ships tumbling through space, and the once mighty vessel broke apart in a fiery burst of destruction. The command center of the Tsan invasion had fallen. Silence followed in the wake of the explosion. The coalition fleet slowed to a halt, their ships drifting in the void, surrounded by debris and the remnants of the battle. The Tsan fleet, leaderless and disorganized, began to retreat. The remaining ships scattered in all directions, unable to maintain their once imposing formation. Admiral Vasquez stood at the helm of the Perseus, breathing heavily, her heart still racing. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had struck a decisive blow. "We did it," she whispered, but the weight of the victory was tempered by the sacrifices made. This was just the beginning of the end for the Tsan, and humanity had shown that they were capable of fighting, of uniting, and of winning. But the cost had been steep, and there was no guarantee that Tsan would retreat without striking back. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. The galaxy had been forever changed. In the days following the destruction of the Tsan command ship, the battlefields were eerily quiet. The Tsan, leaderless and broken, retreated in disarray, their once mighty fleet scattered and disorganized. Human and allied ships swept through the aftermath, collecting the wounded and recovering what was left of their fallen comrades. But amid the devastation, a sense of cautious triumph began to settle over the surviving forces. Admiral Vasquez stood on the command deck of the Perseus, her eyes fixed on the stars outside. The war was far from over, but the tides had turned. The victory at the Tsan command ship had struck a crippling blow to their war effort, and the coalition forces were now emboldened. The humans, once seen as a mere fledgling species, had proven their mettle. And now they would lead the charge to finish what they had started. "Admiral, we've received transmissions from several factions in the galaxy," Lieutenant Go reported, breaking Vasquez from her thoughts. "The Tsan are in full retreat, and many systems are calling for an end to the war. They're ready to make peace." Vasquez turned, her expression stoic. "They're running, not retreating. They'll regroup and strike back when they think the time is right." Commander Lee stepped forward. "True. But the damage is done. Their ability to coordinate is shattered. The other factions are offering support, both military and political, to ensure that Tsan can't make a comeback." Vasquez nodded. "This isn't just a military victory. It's a turning point. The galaxy has seen what we can do. What we will do." The coalition was stronger than ever. Humanity, once isolated and underestimated, was now a beacon of hope and strength. The Tsan, who had thought themselves unstoppable, had been humbled. Their command ship, symbolic of their dominance, was gone, and with it, much of their will to continue the war. "Admiral," a voice from the communications officer spoke up, "we've received a transmission from the Ishtari Council. They've agreed to initiate peace talks with the Tsan." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "Let's hear it." A hologram flickered to life in front of her, a member of the Ishtari Council, a tall, serene figure with glowing blue eyes. "Admiral Vasquez," the Ishtari representative began, his voice calm but with an underlying urgency, "the Tsan have requested a ceasefire. They are willing to negotiate a treaty, provided certain conditions are met." Vasquez crossed her arms. "Conditions? After all the bloodshed they've caused, they expect us to make concessions?" The Ishtari representative nodded gravely. "They claim to have been misled by their leadership. But they are offering to withdraw from the territories they've occupied and to return any prisoners taken during the war." A tense silence filled the room. The coalition had taken heavy losses, Many species had lost entire fleets, families had been torn apart, and countless lives had been lost in the struggle. Trust in the Tsan was in short supply, and the notion of peace seemed distant. "We've seen their true face," Vasquez finally said, her voice quiet but resolute. "The Tsan lied to the galaxy. They wanted domination, not peace. And they've shown they can't be trusted." Commander Lee spoke up. "Perhaps, but this could be our opportunity to end this conflict without more lives lost. If we accept the ceasefire, we can stabilize the galaxy and prepare for whatever comes next." Vasquez paused, weighing her options. The road to peace was never easy, but the price of continued war was steep. The coalition was strong, but there were no guarantees that they could hold their ground against the full might of the Tsan, should they choose to return with vengeance. She looked at the faces around her. The Khazru, the Zarin, the Ishtari, all had fought alongside humanity, and they had all suffered in this war. The time for revenge was behind them. It was time to think of the future. "We'll negotiate," she said, her voice steady. "But we'll make it clear that humanity will never again be subjugated. If they want peace, they'll have to earn it." The peace talks began shortly after, held in a neutral system far from the front lines. Representatives from the Tsan, now led by a new council of military commanders who had risen to power in the wake of their leadership's downfall, sat at the table. The humans and their allies were there as well, their presence a reminder of the coalition's strength. Vasquez stood in the background, her arms crossed as the talks unfolded. The Tsan had been forced to concede their war crimes and offer reparations. They agreed to the return of prisoners, the dismantling of their war fleet, and a full withdrawal from all occupied territories. But most importantly, they agreed to end their campaign of conquest. The treaty, once signed, would mark the beginning of a new chapter. It would be a fragile peace, and no one knew if it would last. The scars of the war ran deep, but the galaxy was united in a way it had never been before. The Tsan had learned that humanity would not bend or break under pressure, and the galaxy had seen what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. In the months that followed, the galaxy slowly began to rebuild. The war had left deep wounds, but the coalition held firm. Vasquez and the leaders of the other factions worked together to ensure that the peace was kept, but they knew that the Tsan would always be a threat, lingering in the shadows. Humanity, however, had proven something far greater than their resilience. They had shown that when the stakes were highest, they could unite with others, overcome impossible odds, and bring victory from the brink of annihilation. The Tsan may have retreated, but humanity had claimed its place among the stars. Admiral Vasquez stood once again on the command deck of the Perseus, looking out at the stars. The war was over for now, but the journey was far from finished. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, full of untold threats, but humanity had made its mark, and no one would ever forget what they had achieved. "We've earned our place here," Vasquez murmured to herself, "and we will protect it." The future was uncertain, but humanity was no longer a fledgling race. They had become a force to be reckoned with, and as long as the stars shone, they would continue to fight for peace, freedom, and the survival of all. The dawn of a new age had begun.